Hello, I'm Nicolas Snyder, the composer of Scavengers Reign, and I am going to be on Cinema Station with Nadjib. Come and check it out.
The world shares things with me, things that are far beyond what's right in front of me. Your time is short.
What's happening to me?
You're so close.
This is Ozzy Marine of the planetary freighter ship Demeter 227.
السلام عليكم ليكيب، جيسبر راكم ملاح في بودكاست جديد، انترفيو جديده. هاد المره اذا تشفاو حكيت لكم على واحد لو شو صافي لونطون واسمه سكافنجرز رين. قلت لكم انتريسون اكسيتيرا. جيت راح نجيب لكم الاشخاص اللي خدموه، مازلنا اون كونتاكت معكم ان شاء الله نهضروا معهم. لكن كانت كاينه واحد الحاجه انتريسونت في لو فيلم، لا في لا سيري بلوتو، سي كو الموسيقى كانت انكرويابل. اي غير واش درنا كونتاكتينا لكم الكومبوزر تاع لا ميوزيك، جبناه اليوم نحكوا على لا كارير تاعو، واش يحب واش ما يحبش، ثم نحكوا على لي زانسبيراسيون تاعو، كيفاش حتى دار لا ميوزيك تاع سيرتان سان اكسيتيرا. دونك تبعوا معنا ان شاء الله تعجبكم ليبيزود. So hi Nicholas, how are you?
I'm doing great, Najib. How are you?
I'm great, thank you so much. Welcome to our
Yeah,
podcast. It's truly an honor to have you
thanks for
here
having
today.
me. Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about anything or Scavengers Reign, I'm curious to know how you got your start in the music industry before we talk about the first short and the Scavengers Reign after that.
My dad is a pianist, and it's the only job he's ever had. And he just always had synthesizers and keyboards laying around the house. And music always, as a child, seemed like impossibly abstract to me. But as I got older, I started to just tinker with the things that he had laying around the house. And I just kind of picked it up organically. I attempted lessons here and there. I have no classical training. I really just learned all of this from playing and exploring. And I was in bands in my late teens and my 20s, and did that route for a little while. And then in my late 20s, I decided that I was going to move to a place that had opportunities to make music on a more professional level, allow me to be in the studio and create more, not have to worry about touring or performing as much. I always liked the creative aspect of it more. And yeah, I just slowly kind of worked my way up, and eventually ended up meeting and befriending a lot of really creative people, Joe Bennett being one of them. Him and I are really good friends, and that's kind of how my relationship with Scavengers Reign came about.
Let's talk about that transition between your amateur career and your professional career.
Sure.
Was it any moment or experience or memory that sparked your interest in that transition? Let's say to go into a professional career. Are there any specific composers that inspired you in your music? What was that moment that resoned with you? And second, how was are there any specific themes or instruments that you feel define your compositions? I guess piano. I know that, and the synth, I guess too, or violent. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll answer your second question first. I honestly don't. Whenever people ask me what my main instrument is, I say the laptop. And like I said, music always felt like a really big hurdle for me and understand. Anytime I tried to take a lesson as a child, it felt like learning algebra or something like that. And it was really just the act of playing it myself that felt real and good, just the exploring aspect. And there's no one instrument. I don't like to practice. I don't like to rehearse. I never could get myself to sit and practice scales on the piano. I'm not a great musician in general, to be honest, but I'm good at crafting music and coming up with things and finding ways to fit it together. And that's my craft. So yeah, the piano is probably like the main conduit for coming up with things and sounds and whatnot. But I really don't think of it that way. I would not say that the piano is my main instrument, or synthesizers are my main instrument. It's really just a means to an end. And if you were to, if I was like to be put on the spot at a party and someone wanted me to play piano or something, I think a lot of people would be surprised at how mediocre I am. So, and yeah, I mean, I don't know that there was one particular moment that made me take this path. And in fact, I don't even know that I knew where I was going necessarily. I knew what felt good to me. And I had kind of like a dark period in my late 20s when I was playing in bands. I was getting older, and I was just really broke. I had to move back in with my parents a few times. Our record label dropped our band, our manager quit, and just all of these kind of things happened that really made me rethink my trajectory. And it was either I had a decision that I had to make at that point in my life, and I probably at the time would have been about 28 years old. And it was like, do I want to pursue music? Do I want to continue pursuing music? Because the path that I had been on thus far felt like it was coming to an end. I didn't really like being on the road all the time, being in bars and clubs all the time, which is kind of what that was. But I loved the process of making an album, the process of writing songs and coming up with melodies and crafting sounds. And I just came to the conclusion that I couldn't not do that. And so I decided that I was going to either move to New York or Los Angeles. And I love New York, but I went with Los Angeles because it just felt like I could get a little bit more space, a little bit more fresh air. Well, maybe fresh air isn't quite, I could get more outside experience than, yeah, so when I turned 30, I moved to LA and I worked a bunch of random odd jobs. I drove for Uber and Lyft and Postmates when it was in its very early inception. I was a screen printer. I did sous chef work for a personal chef who did parties and things like that. And eventually got my foot in the door through a friend who was a sound designer at a music house that did commercial work. And there was a point when they sent me an unfinished commercial. It was Jeff Goldblum standing in front of a green screen. It was an apartments.com commercial, and he was saying weird stuff that I didn't really understand. But the fact that they sent me this unfinished commercial with Jeff Goldblum made me feel like, oh wow, like I think I stepped through some sort of industry door here, and I'm kind of doing this, like this is happening. And I was really insecure. I was watching YouTube videos to see how to do these things. I still do that sometimes. I'm still learning. I still don't know what I'm doing from project to project. I always have to kind of figure myself out all over again. But so it's been more of like a kind of unraveling of events than just one specific event. And as far as like composers that have influenced me, there are very many, but I think so much of that was in my youth and more of a subliminal thing where I didn't really think about who was doing it, but like, you know, certain soundtracks that just kind of, I remember the Rain Man soundtrack when I was a kid. It's a really strange soundtrack. It doesn't make any sense to what,
Hans
you know,
Zimmer, I guess.
there's like, it's Hans Zimmer and it's very mystical. There are these like Peruvian flutes and sometimes it sounds almost like something that you would hear in like a massage situation. But like, I don't know why it spoke to me. And that was one of the first times I recognized like, oh, like there's music happening behind these this emotional storytelling process that is, you know, some of it speaks to me and some of it doesn't. And yeah, I mean, and as time has gone on, I've come to realize that Hans Zimmer has been a pretty big influence. But I mean, there are endless influences.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So your first biggest show is Scavengers Reign. That show has touched the hearts of many of us, of the audience. Your music actually make the show truly special. A ton of people loved your
Oh,
soundtracks, and I really appreciate it. I'm aware that you're
thank
familiar
you.
with one of your the creators, Scavengers Reign, as you said, Joe. You worked with him
Yeah,
in his short Birds, I guess, back in 2020.
yeah.
When you did first hear about the show Scavengers Reign, was it before or after it was developed? Was it after the release of the short? What was the reaction after reading the scripts or hearing the pitch of the show?
Um, I became friends with Joe in probably 2016, maybe. And it was just, it had nothing to do with work or industry or anything like that. My girlfriend had met him at a workshop, and his girlfriend at the time and my girlfriend at the time, we all got together and kind of went on like a double date type thing. And Joe and I just immediately really connected. We had a very similar background. We liked a lot of the same things. We were just very fast friends. And I don't even know that Joe really knew what it was that I did. And I kind of started to, you know, take a look at some of his stuff, and it was really, it felt really special and unique. Like he was really on a path of his own. And I always had an appreciation for like oddball animation. I loved back in the 90s, there used to be this thing called liquid television on MTV, and it was just all of this. It's where like Beavis and Butthead came from, and Eon Flux and things like that. But I always had a connection with that sort of thing. And I just really appreciated his work. And probably about the third or fourth time we all got together, him and his partner at the time invited me over to their house. And for about the first 20 minutes, Joe was not around. And I was like, what's Joe doing? And his girlfriend was like, oh, he's in the back. He's finishing something. He'll be out shortly. And when he came out, he was like so excited. He's like, I just finished it. Him and Charles were working remotely, and they had just like rendered the final version of the Scavengers short that ended up being on Adult Swim. Mm-hmm. And he was like, do you want to see it? And I was like, of course, yeah, I want to see it. And as soon as I sat down and it began watching it, I was just completely like enamored with it. And honestly, I was like, oh, I wish I would have had something to do with this. But there wasn't a whole lot of music. And I remember thinking like, there's not really a whole lot of music going on here. And we just had dinner after that, and I told him I thought it was incredible, but I was just playing it cool, and I didn't want to push myself on him or anything like that. And then a little bit later, he was trying to pitch a show that never got made, and asked me if I wanted to take a crack at making some music for it. And so I sent him all of these tracks, one of which, the very first track that I ever sent Joe, was actually the Scavengers theme song, but it wasn't for Scavengers, it was for another show. And I made it really quickly, and I sent it to him, and he really just dug it. And like I said, that show didn't happen. So the Scavengers story kind of unraveled over a long period of time. After that show fell apart, Scavengers got picked up by Adult Swim for a pilot episode. We got enough money to make a pilot episode. And I was trying to make music for the theme song, and it was like, yeah, this is kind of cool, but it was kind of like action-y theme song music. And Joe at one point just dropped that track in and sent it to me, and it was just like, yeah, this feels right, this works. Like, I don't know why it feels right. It was just kind of one of these serendipitous things that happened, and there's not a whole lot of like logic to it. It just felt right. And that's kind of how I operate. Just, what feels right. I don't tend to overthink too much, though it does happen. And then AT&T bought Cartoon Network's parent company, and everything got shelved for about 4 years. So we made the pilot episode. I made the music for the pilot episode, but episode 2 didn't go into production until 4 years later, whenever their contract ended, and HBO Max, what was called HBO Max at the time, now it's just called Max, picked up. Yeah, it's confusing. Picked up Scavengers, and for a bigger budget, and so we just kind of picked up where we left off. But I had learned a lot in the meantime. Joe had learned a lot in the meantime, and I think most people don't. No one's ever said anything to me about it, but if you watch episode 1 and then you watch episode 2, it becomes, after episode 1, a lot more melodic and a lot more kind of orchestral.
Yeah.
Whereas the first episode, again, happened 4 years prior, and it was, I think the intent was slightly different then. It was a little bit more textural and atmospheric. And though those elements are still very present in the later episodes, I had a strong desire to attach themes to certain people, and so it became more melodically driven.
Mm-hmm. So for those who didn't have the occasion to watch the show, we explore 3 different sub-stories, let's say, set in the same universe, or I could say the same place. I believe each group experienced a unique atmosphere on this strange planet, both before and after the crash of Demeter. We have Ursula and Levi, AZ and Sam, and Cayman, and some other characters. Can you take us through your creative process in establishing the sonic landscape for the show, or the atmosphere, and how was your approach to every sub-story? For example, the story of Ursula and Levi, the story of AZ and Sam, for example.
Yeah, they all happened very differently. Some of them, it was very organic. And again, in episode 1, there were not themes for characters or for their particular journeys. with the exception of Hollow and Cayman, that was a very strong melodic theme, but there were kind of 3 or 4 different melodic pieces happening throughout that first episode, all of which I ended up kind of dissecting and putting through various it was almost like Hollow's theme developed the way that Hollow did, where it started out kind of small and minimal, with lots of spaciousness around it, and then just got larger and larger and larger. And I use it both for Hollow and Cayman because they're kind of conjoined quite literally after a few episodes. And that developed that way, and it was more of like a tragic theme with them, where, you know, it started out really beautiful and serene, but as the sonic structure of that theme grew, it became more and more tragic and dark, and it was a really fun and easy theme to work with in that regard, because it just, I don't know, it just worked really well. And I decided early on that I was going to make the whole series, or I was going to attempt to make the whole series exist within one key, or 2 keys. Is actually B minor and the relational major D major, so it all would fit together, and you could, like, you know, this one track would tail out and then this one track would come in, and it all would just kind of flow like one piece. With Ozzy, I got a call from James, who's a friend of mine, who is a writer and producer on the show, and they were in the writing room stages, and he was like, we're writing into the show this melody that Ozzy hums. It's a melody that, like, maybe her mom hummed to her when she was a kid, and she just always remembered that, and it's like a comforting thing for her. And Levi picks up on this melody and adds to it, and it's a signifier of her developing consciousness, that she's able to unprompted write music. And in fact, in the show, I believe Ozzy says, like, I think you're the first robot to have written music. And so I spent like a day or two just kind of thinking, what would that be? And it ended up being this kind of almost like fairy tale kind of melody. And then I developed a counter melody that would be Levi's melody that happened over top of it. And I did my best when there was an opportunity to, if the scene was more geared toward Ozzy, I would play her melody, and if it was more geared toward Levi, I would play her counter melody. And you know, and it happened in kind of subliminal ways that I don't know would be super recognizable to people. And in fact, that storyline doesn't really even come into fruition until about episode 6, I think. And at that point, you would have been hearing those melodies a little bit throughout. And then ideally, it kind of makes, you know, more sense. And then Ursula and Sam's theme, Joe wanted me to make something that was just really simple for them, and it was kind of like this theme of just like relentlessness, just kind of like going and going and going. And I went back and watched episode 1, and I was like, is there any melodic material here that I can pull from. And there was one tiny little bit, because most of it was just textural and sonic stuff, but there wasn't a whole lot of melody. There was one tiny little bit in the very first episode whenever they try to get some sort of generator going to bring down, I think, the ship, and it doesn't work. But right before you realize it doesn't work, you see the ship in the sky, and there's just this little like, wum, 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 wum. It's just this tiny little thing. And I was like, that's kind of a good little melody right there. And so it just turned into like, I just, one kind of note, dum, 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 and that just ended up being their theme, and it ended up working really nicely. Every time you saw them through the forest, there would typically be some element of that theme in there, and it did kind of just represent their like journey to get to the Demeter at all costs.
Speaking of
So-
episode and themes, let's take a moment to pause and admire the particular scene from episode 3. I guess it's the receiver something theme, the
Mhm.
violence, the vocals, the orchestra. Is there any specific musical cue element that you feel particularly proud of in that scene? And how did you exactly worked in that scene? Did you watch the pre-visuals and get inspired by them, or read and get lost in your imagination, read the script or the text?
So the way it typically works is that I'll get an episode in what's called an animatic form usually, and it's essentially a storyboard put into video format. And usually it's mostly still images, illustrations still, and then eventually they'll send me newer cuts, and it'll begin to fill out with actual animation. And when I get these animatics and the way that they're edited together, and I think Joe did a lot of the editing for that first batch of episodes, there's reference music in there, and it's like a guiding point for me, and it's never like we want this exact thing, or I shouldn't say it's never, it's usually like we don't want this exact thing, but this is the vibe, this is the timing, this is the mood. And then I try to forget that track and do my own thing, but just keeping in mind the mood, the timing, sometimes the rhythmic movement of it. But for the little man in the flower in the wall, Joe put probably like one of the most crushingly beautiful pieces of music ever, which is sh.B.yu Presner's Lacrimosa, which, like, Joe's a really big fan of Tree of Life. There's a segment in Tree of Life where you kind of see the world through this cosmic landscape unravel, and Lacrimosa, I believe, is playing in that, and it's always been a big influence on him, and I'm a big fan of that song as well. And it was really intimidating. It's really intimidating when someone puts like just a masterpiece of music into a animatic for a reference track. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll just do that. But I just put my head down and got to it, and it took maybe like 3 or 4 days to kind of work my way through the foundation of that and the structure of it. I knew I was going to at some point employ a vocalist, and that they were probably going to be from more of an operatic world. And yeah, it's hard to talk about. Like, I don't know how else it just happens. It's really just me exploring on a keyboard and exploring with instruments until it makes sense. And I think building up into the actual track was more difficult than once I actually got to the track. Once I got to that main chunk where there are vocals, it was really just a matter of finding the pacing of it, where each big part's going to hit. Like, oh, I need to slow the song down a little bit, or oh, I need to extend this section. But yeah, it's hard to talk about the way these things come, because they really just flow out sometimes, and that was an instance of that. It just happened, and then I had like I said, I have no classical training whatsoever. I have a part-time assistant that has perfect pitch, and she helped me notate the vocal part of it. And then we had a really great singer come in and did that in one evening session, and that was it.
Such
Just
a
happened like that.
such a masterpiece. We're tight
Oh, thank you.
in time. We have like say 8 minutes. Last question: as a composer of the show, I would love your point of view on the story. What are your thoughts about it? What was really about the show? Life, sacrifice, humanity? What do you think?
Wait, what was that last part? What about the show?
What was really about?
Oh. For me, the show is about a relationship with nature that comes to show you that you are a part of nature too. And in this way, I'm so proud to be a part of this, because it's really something that I believe. I think that one of mankind's great follies is that we believe that many of us believe that we are separate from nature, and that nature is something that needs to be conquered, or nature is something that is not like us. But the reality of it is that we're a part of nature. Like, our consciousness is the consciousness of this planet, and I think that the show is really a metaphor for that. And I don't know that there's a higher message that I would want to put forth in the world. So for this to be a project that really was made with love, with friends, and was something that just felt like it was meant to be, really felt within my natural realm of expression. I'm just super proud of that. Yeah, because to me, it's a show about nature and human nature being an aspect of the nature of the world and potentially the universe and cosmos at large.
Congratulations for you, for the hard work, for Joe, for the rest of the team. You did such a great job. Once again, Nicolas, thank you so much for joining us. Wishing you the
Thank you,
best
Nadjib.
for the rest of your career. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome.